My mother spent 27 years telling anyone who would listen that my older brother was the one who would carry this family somewhere worth going. She wasn't wrong that he went somewhere. She just never imagined I'd already owned the building he arrived at. It started on a Thursday afternoon in late October, when my phone rang while I was standing in the middle of a construction site in downtown Phoenix, hard hat on, blueprints in one hand, and a lukewarm coffee in the other. My project manager was mid-sentence about the East Wing's ventilation problem when I saw my mother's name on the screen. I told him to hold the thought. I should have let it go to voicemail. "Sweetheart," my mother said, using the particular version of that word that means she wants something. "I need to talk to you about the seating arrangement for the reception." My brother was getting married in 6 weeks. I already knew what was coming, because something always came when my mother called about my brother's events. There was always an adjustment. Always a very reasonable explanation for why that adjustment made total sense if I would just stop being so sensitive about everything. "We're going to put you at table 12, she said. I looked at the blueprints in my hand. Table 12 is near the exit, Mom. It's near the bar, actually. Very social. You'll meet people. You said the wedding was 400 guests. Where's table 12 relative to the head table?" A pause. The particular kind of pause my mother deployed when she was choosing between honesty and a softer version of honesty. "It's on the east side of the ballroom. Cassandra's family is taking up most of the front tables, and you know how large they are. There are just so many of them. And Ryan wants her to feel comfortable. Mom, and honestly, you'll be fine. You always find a way to entertain yourself. You're so independent. Mom, and Cassandra feels a little intimidated by you, which I think is actually a compliment if you think about it the right way." I pulled the phone from my ear for a moment and looked at the sky. It was that particular shade of Arizona blue that feels almost aggressive in its brightness. I put the phone back. "Why does Cassandra feel intimidated by me?" "Because you don't talk enough at family dinners. You sit there with that look on your face, and people don't know what you're thinking, and it makes them uncomfortable." My mother's voice had shifted into the efficient register she used when she'd decided the conversation was already over, and she was just waiting for me to catch up. Also, I wanted to mention that Ryan and Cassandra's gift registry has a few things still unchecked in the higher range. The KitchenAid mixer is still available. It's $450, but it would mean so much to them. I already bought them a gift. What did you get? I had, in fact, already transferred $50,000 into a joint account I'd set up in both their names, with a note explaining it was a down payment fund for whenever they were ready to buy a home. I hadn't told anyone because I didn't want the conversation that would follow. I knew exactly what that conversation would sound like. "A travel fund," I said vaguely. "A travel fund," my mother repeated, in the tone of someone who has been personally wronged. "Ryan and Cassandra are not big travelers, sweetheart. They're homebodies. They'd much rather have something practical. Get the mixer. I'll text you the link." She hung up before I could respond. I stood in the dirt and dust of a project I'd been building for 2 years and felt the old familiar weight of it. The weight of being the second child, the quiet one, the one who didn't perform well enough to earn the good seats at my own family's table. To understand why I never told them, I need to tell you how I got here. When my brother Ryan and I were growing up, the difference between us was simple on the surface. He was loud and certain and comfortable, taking up space. I was none of those things. I was the kid who read during recess, who stayed late after school to talk to the math teacher because I genuinely wanted to understand why the formulas worked the way they did, who spent summers doing what my mother called nothing useful and what I would now call learning the foundational logic of how money compounds over time. Ryan played baseball. My mother and father went to every game. I did a regional science competition in 6th grade and placed second in the state. They found out 3 weeks later, when my teacher called the house to congratulate them. It wasn't cruelty exactly. It was more like a failure of vision. Ryan was legible to them. His achievements had scoreboards and trophies and other parents clapping in the bleachers. Mine happened quietly, in spreadsheets and library books. And when you can't see something, it's easy to believe it isn't there. By the time I was in college, the pattern was fully established. Ryan got the car for graduation. Ryan got the help with his apartment deposit. Ryan got the phone calls that started with, "We're so proud of you." I got the calls that started with, "We worry about you," because I had chosen finance over something more visible. and because I had a habit of making decisions without consulting anyone first, which my mother experienced as a form of abandonment. I graduated with honors. I went to work at a commercial real estate firm. I spent 4 years learning everything I could about how properties were valued, how deals were structured, how money moved through development projects. I saved aggressively, lived in a studio apartment for 3 years longer than I needed to, and at 28, I took my first small position in a mixed-use development outside of Scottsdale. I did not tell my family. I had tried, once, to explain what I was doing, and my mother had asked whether it was like flipping houses on those TV shows, and Ryan had suggested I be careful because real estate is very volatile right now based on something he'd read in a Facebook comment. I decided the explanation wasn't worth the energy it would cost me. By the time Ryan announced his engagement to Cassandra, I was managing a portfolio of 6 properties across 2 states and had just finalized a partnership on a boutique hotel in downtown Scottsdale that I will get back to shortly. Cassandra was not a bad person. I want to be precise about that because the story is easier to tell if she's a villain, and she wasn't. Exactly. She was the kind of woman who had been told her whole life that she was exceptional and had organized her personality around that belief so completely that any evidence to the contrary read to her as a threat rather than information. She was beautiful in a high-maintenance way, relentlessly social, and possessed of a talent for making you feel slightly less interesting than you'd felt 5 minutes before talking to her. She didn't dislike me. She just ranked me. Within about 45 minutes of our first meeting, she had assessed my apartment, my car, my clothes, and my job title, which at that point I had deliberately kept vague, and placed me somewhere in the middle of the spreadsheet she carried in her head for categorizing people. Not impressive enough to court, not low enough to dismiss, mildly irrelevant. That assessment didn't change over the 2 years she and Ryan dated. If anything, it calcified. I was the quiet sister who worked in real estate in some capacity that no one could quite explain, who showed up to holidays and didn't talk about herself much, and clearly didn't have Ryan's natural warmth or their mother's social ease. Cassandra was always perfectly pleasant to me in the way that people are pleasant to furniture that's been in the room long enough to become invisible. The venue they chose for the wedding was the Aldara Hotel, a restored mid-century property in downtown Scottsdale with Spanish colonial bones and a renovation that had cost substantially more than the original acquisition. It had a courtyard ceremony space and a ballroom that held 400 and a restaurant with a chef who had been written up in 3 national publications. It was beautiful. It was expensive, and I would know both of those things firsthand because 8 months earlier, as the senior equity partner in the ownership group, I had signed the papers that made me part owner of the building. I had not mentioned this to my family. I had not mentioned it because, as I've said, there was no version of that conversation that ended well for me. If I told them I owned part of a hotel, my mother would ask why I hadn't told them sooner, and the answer that their track record of making me feel small didn't exactly inspire disclosure was not one she was equipped to receive gracefully. Ryan would make a joke about me being too serious. Cassandra would recalibrate her assessment upward and become warm in the specific way that people become warm when they realize they've been ignoring something useful. So I said nothing. I watched Ryan book the Aldara for his wedding. I sat with that information privately, not as a weapon exactly, but as a kind of quiet comfort. A reminder, on the hard days, that I was not who they thought I was. The 6 weeks between my mother's phone call and the wedding were unremarkable, except for one conversation. Cassandra called me directly, which was unusual enough that I almost didn't answer. "I just wanted to check in," she said, "about the rehearsal dinner situation." The rehearsal dinner was the night before the wedding, also at the Aldara. "What about it?" "It's mostly going to be Cassandra's family, which is, we have a lot of cousins, and her parents have a big friend group, so the dinner is going to be pretty full. And Ryan and I were thinking." She stopped. Started again. "We love you, obviously, and your family, but we thought it might actually be more comfortable for you if you just came to the wedding itself and skipped the rehearsal dinner, since you don't know most of the people who'll be there." I was quiet for a moment. "We just don't want you to feel out of place," Cassandra continued, her voice taking on the warm, apologetic register of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. "You know how you get in big social situations. How do I get? You go quiet, and people notice. And then it gets a little awkward. It's not a criticism, it's just who you are. Ryan completely agrees. I thought about the 300 square feet of event space at the Aldera that I had specifically approved the design of, the tiles I had chosen, the lighting fixtures I had signed off on. I thought about the restaurant where they were hosting the rehearsal dinner, where the general manager was a woman named Denise who sent me updates every Thursday morning and called me by my first name. That's fine, I said. I'll come to the wedding. We just think it's better this way. Less stress for everyone. Totally fine, I said again. See you Saturday. What I did after I hung up was call my best friend, a woman I have known since the second grade who goes by Rosie and who is constitutionally incapable of taking anything too seriously. I told her everything, the table 12, the rehearsal dinner dismissal, the KitchenAid mixer, and she listened until I was done, and then she said, "So you own the hotel. Partial ownership, significant partial. And they're getting married there. Saturday." There was a long pause on Rosie's end. "I need to come to this wedding. You weren't invited. Then get me invited. Tell them you're bringing a +1. I didn't get a +1. Another pause. "Okay," she said slowly. "I'm coming as your date. You can figure out the paperwork." I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in about a week, and it felt like something releasing in my chest. "You'll just sit there and watch." "Oh, I'm not just watching anything. I'm going to be extremely present." She paused. "Also, I'm going to need you to text me everything about the contract situation, so I understand all the ways in which this could go sideways in our favor." The morning of the wedding, I wore a dress the color of deep water, the kind of blue that photographs well and commands a room without announcing itself. I'd bought it for a conference in Seattle 6 months ago, and it still had that particular quality of expensive things, the quality of being completely unremarkable until you were close enough to understand what you were looking at. Rosie wore red, which I had tried to talk her out of, and failed. We arrived at the Aldara together. The lobby was full of people who had that particular look of wedding guests in the couple of hours before things start, slightly overdressed, slightly anxious, operating on a mixture of good intentions and pre-event champagne. I checked in at the welcome table and found my name. And there it was in clean printed script, table 12. The woman at the table gave me a small envelope with the table card inside. I took it and smiled and walked away and handed the card to Rosie. "Table 12, she read. "Near the east exit. And you own the east exit." "I own the building the east exit is in." Rosie folded the card very precisely and put it in her clutch. "This is going to be a wonderful evening," she said. "I want to be clear about something. I had not gone to that wedding with a plan. I had not engineered anything. I had shown up because he was my brother, and I loved him imperfectly, in the complicated way that you love people who have benefited from a system that cost you, through no real fault of their own. I wanted to watch him get married. I wanted to eat the food that I knew would be excellent because I had approved the catering contract. I wanted to sit at table 12, near the east exit, and drink good wine and watch Rosie make friends with strangers. What I had not planned on was the toast. The reception had been going for about an hour. The ceremony had been lovely. Cassandra had cried in a photogenic way. Ryan had teared up in a way that made every woman over 50 in the room press a hand to her heart. I had sat in the second row and felt the specific mix of genuine warmth and deep tiredness that my family always produced in me, in concentrated doses. At table 12, I had found myself next to an elderly man who turned out to be Cassandra's great-uncle from Minnesota, who had opinions about the drought situation in Arizona that were both wrong and passionate, and a younger couple who were friends of Ryan's from college, and who were very interested in talking to each other, and no one else. Rosie had already made 2 new friends, and was on her second glass of champagne. I was on my first, slowly. The toasts began after dinner. Cassandra's maid of honor went first, a long, story-heavy speech that was loving and a little meandering. Ryan's best man went second, shorter, funnier, landing well. Then my mother stood up. My mother is a gifted public speaker. She has warmth and timing and the particular skill of making a room feel included in whatever she's sharing. I watched her from table 12 and thought, not for the first time, what it must be like to have all that warmth aimed at you. She talked about Ryan. She talked about the first time she knew he was special, a story about him at age 5, deciding to organize the family's bookshelves alphabetically, which she framed as evidence of extraordinary character, rather than what it actually was, which was a child who liked order. She talked about watching him grow into someone she was proud of. She talked about Cassandra and how perfectly matched they were, how Cassandra brought out a lightness in Ryan that the whole family was grateful for. "When I think about the family Ryan has built," my mother said, her voice taking on the particular resonance of prepared remarks, "I think about the values we tried to give him growing up. Hard work, generosity, showing up for the people you love." She paused. "Ryan has always shown up. That's just who he is. He's never taken the easy road. He's never expected anything to be handed to him. And watching him build this life, this beautiful, full, extraordinary life is the greatest gift his father and I could have asked for." Rosie's hand found my arm under the table. I knew it was not meant as a comparison. I believe my mother was not sitting at that microphone, thinking about me at all in that moment, which is in some ways the more accurate description of the problem. But then my brother stood up to say a few words of his own, and somewhere in the middle of thanking his groomsmen and praising Cassandra's family, he turned to look at where my mother was sitting, and then out toward the room. And he said, "And I know not everyone here could make it to the rehearsal dinner last night. And I want to say that family shows up in different ways, and we're glad everyone who's here tonight is here tonight." He smiled in the direction of table 12. It was so gentle and so perfectly worded that half the room probably didn't catch it, but Rosie caught it, and I caught it. And then Cassandra's older sister, who had already delivered one toast and apparently had more to say, picked up her glass and said, "I just want to add one thing about Cassie that I think everyone should know." She smiled the smile of someone who has practiced this. "Cassie has always taken care of the people she loves, and that includes Ryan's family. She's been so patient, so generous, making sure everyone feels included, even when a delicate pause, even when that's not always the easiest thing." The implications settled over table 12 like fog. "Basically," Cassandra's sister continued, clearly warming up, "what I'm saying is that my sister married a man with an amazing heart, and she has also, I will say, shown tremendous grace with some of the, let's call them, more complicated family dynamics." She laughed. Several people laughed with her. Rosie set down her champagne glass. I put my hand on Rosie's arm this time. I shook my head. "Not yet," Rosie said, her voice completely neutral. "Not yet," I said. But Cassandra's sister was not done. She had the microphone and the champagne and the specific confidence of someone who has never once in her life sat at table 12. "I'm just saying," she continued, "that Cassie is the kind of woman who makes room for everyone at the table. Even when some people at that table haven't exactly, contributed in the ways you might hope." The room had gone from festive to that particular strained silence of people waiting to see if this is going to become a thing. Ryan was staring at his plate. My mother had a fixed, attentive smile. Cassandra was looking at her sister with an expression I couldn't fully read from table 12. I stood up. I didn't plan it. It was a reflex, the same way you pull your hand back from something hot before you've consciously decided to. I stood up and I smoothed my dress and I picked up my glass of wine and I said, from table 12, in a voice that carried clearly across the ballroom, "I'd like to say something." The silence became the kind that has weight. Cassandra's sister looked at me. The room looked at me. "I don't want to take up a lot of time," I said, walking slowly toward the front of the room. People shifted in their seats. Someone near the back lowered their phone. "Ryan, I love you. Cassandra, I wish you both genuinely well. I mean that." I stopped in a position where I could see my mother and the Cassandra's sister, and also, and this mattered, the hotel's general manager, Denise, who was standing near the bar with a tablet in her hands and had been there the whole evening, keeping everything running the way we both knew it should run. "I've been at table 12 all evening," I said, "near the east exit. It's a nice table. Great view of the bar." A few polite laughs. "I wasn't at the rehearsal dinner last night. That was a choice that was made for me, and I've made my peace with it." I glanced at Cassandra's sister. "I've also spent the evening hearing some characterizations of myself that I think deserve a small correction." My mother had gone very still. "I'm not a complicated family dynamic," I said. "I'm a person who made a decision a long time ago to build something quietly, without an audience, because every time I tried to build something with an audience, the people I loved most had a way of making it smaller. I don't blame anyone for that. I understand why it happened, but I do want to clear something up. I looked at Denise. She looked back at me with the expression of a woman who has just understood something and is recalibrating very quickly. "Denise," I said, "could you come over here for a second?" Denise walked over. She was professional and composed, the way good hospitality people always are, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. "Can you tell the room who I am?" I asked. A moment, and then Denise said, "You're one of the ownership partners of the Aldara." The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. This one had a specific texture. "How much of the Aldara?" someone near the front asked, half under their breath. Denise glanced at me. I nodded. "Controlling equity," Denise said. I looked at my mother. Her fixed smile had not changed, but something behind it had. I looked at Cassandra's sister, who was still holding her champagne glass, but was no longer performing anything. "I'm not complicated," I said again, quietly. "I'm just quiet. And quiet people sometimes build things while everyone else is making noise." I raised my glass. "To Ryan and Cassandra. May your home be full of everything you need." I walked back to table 12. Rosie was waiting. She handed me my wine and leaned in and said, at a volume designed to be heard only by me, but possibly also by the great-uncle from Minnesota, "I have been waiting my entire adult life to witness this." What happened after was not a single explosion. It was more like water finding cracks. My mother came to table 12 approximately 4 minutes after I sat down. She did not come with an apology. She came with the same recalibrating energy Cassandra's sister had deployed upward, the instant reframe, the sudden glow of reflected pride. "Why didn't you tell us?" she said, her voice low and thick with something that wanted to present itself as emotion. "We would have..." "Would have what?" I asked, not unkindly. She opened her mouth, closed it. "Mom," I said, "you put me at table 12 because you thought it was the right table for me, based on what you knew. I'm not angry about it, but I also think you understand right now why I stopped telling you things." She sat down next to me. For a long moment, she didn't say anything, and in that silence I could feel her working through something complicated, something she would not be able to fully process tonight, and maybe not for a long time. "I didn't mean to make you feel small," she finally said. "I know," I said. "Your father and I are very proud." "Mom," I said it gently, "let's not do that tonight. Tonight is for Ryan." She looked at me for a long moment. I saw something move across her face that I didn't have a name for. Then she stood up, straightened her dress, and went back to the head table. Ryan came over about 20 minutes later. He sat in the chair my mother had vacated, and he didn't say anything for a moment, which was unusual for Ryan, who had an opinion about most situations within 30 seconds of encountering them. "The Aldara," he finally said. "The Aldara. You've owned part of this hotel. 8 months. He let out a breath. "Why didn't you tell me?" And here is where I had to be careful, because Ryan was not my mother, and he was not Cassandra's sister, and the conversation I needed to have with him was not the same one. Because the last time I told you about a project I was working on, I said, you told me I should be careful about over-leveraging and that real estate was volatile, based on a Facebook comment. You were trying to help. I know that. But I stopped telling you things because telling you things stopped feeling safe. He was quiet for a moment. "That's fair," he said, which surprised me. "I don't want anything from this," I said. "I'm not here to prove anything. I just got tired of someone describing me as a complicated family dynamic when I was sitting 20 feet away." Ryan nodded slowly. His eyes were doing something complicated. "Cassandra's sister was out of line," he said. "I'll talk to her." "You don't need to." "I want to." I looked at my brother. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had coasted on a current that I had to swim against my whole life, and he had done it without cruelty and without full awareness, which is the most common way that kind of thing happens. "Okay," I said. "Thank you." He squeezed my shoulder once and went back to his wife. Cassandra came over last, and this surprised me most of all. She came without her sister and without her performance, and she sat down and folded her hands on the table and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, which was an expression of someone who is reckoning with something uncomfortable about themselves. "I owe you an apology," she said. "For the rehearsal dinner. For the rehearsal dinner. And for a lot of dinners before that." She looked down at her hands, at the new ring. I told myself I was being practical, making sure events ran smoothly, making sure Ryan wasn't distracted by. She stopped. I ranked you, she said. I ranked you, and I put you in the wrong place, and I'm sorry. I looked at her for a moment. I appreciate that, I said, and I meant it. I'd like to start over, she said, if that's something you'd be open to. I thought about it genuinely, which I think she deserved. I'm open to that, I said finally. But I want you to know that the version of me you're open to starting over with is the same version who was at table 12. I don't have a different one. She nodded. Something in her face settled. I know, she said. I'm starting to understand that. She went back to Ryan. I watched them together and thought that maybe, in some years and some honest conversations, this could become something that actually worked. Rosie leaned over. So, she said, what is the checkout time at this hotel? I laughed. 11. And do you get a room discount? Rosie. I'm just saying, the west-facing suites have incredible sunrise views according to the website, and I feel like tonight I should probably not drive back to Tempe. I'll see what I can do. The months that followed the wedding were quieter than I expected. Things rarely resolve the way stories suggest they do, in clean acts with clear conclusions. What actually happened was slower and less dramatic, and more real. My mother called me the following Tuesday. Not to talk about my company or my portfolio or what any of it meant for the family's sense of itself. She called to ask if I wanted to have lunch. Just lunch. She didn't mention the Aldara. She asked how I was doing in the specific way of someone who has realized, maybe for the first time, that they don't actually know the answer to that question and would like to. We had lunch. It was not perfect. She said 3 things that made me press my lips together and look out the window, and I said 1 thing that made her go quiet in a way that took a few minutes to recover from. But we had lunch. And then we had lunch again, 3 weeks later. And slowly, imperfectly, we started building something that was new enough to be worth keeping. Ryan called me about a month after the wedding. He had apparently spent some time looking into my work, the properties, the portfolio, the Aldara partnership. I didn't know any of this, he said. I know. I should have asked. You didn't know there was anything to ask about. I should have known, he said, and the thing about Ryan is that he meant it. He wasn't performing accountability. He was genuinely sitting with something uncomfortable and choosing not to put it down. I want to know now, if you're willing to tell me. I thought about that for a moment. Start with a question, I said. Whatever you actually want to know. He asked a question. It was a good one. We talked for 2 hours. Cassandra's sister sent a text 3 weeks after the wedding that said, simply, I was out of line. I'm sorry. I wrote back, thank you. We have not spoken since, and I think that is probably the right amount of resolution for what happened between us, which was a small wound efficiently delivered and a small acknowledgement efficiently returned. As for the Aldara, the partnership is performing well. We're in the planning stages for a second property, a mixed-use development in Tempe that will take about 3 years to come together. Denise is still our general manager, still sends Thursday updates, still calls me by my first name. Last week, she told me a couple had booked the ballroom for a wedding next fall and asked if I wanted to review the event package personally. I told her the team had it handled. I don't need to oversee everything. I built the thing so it could run without me watching. That was always the point, not to be visible, but to be solid, to be the kind of presence that holds weight without demanding to be noticed. I still think about table 12 sometimes. I think about sitting there in the corner near the east exit with Rosie and the great uncle from Minnesota and his strong feelings about Arizona's water supply, watching my family move through a room they didn't know I partially owned. There was a loneliness in it that I won't pretend wasn't there. But there was also something else. Something I've been trying to find the right word for. I think the word is readiness. I was ready, finally, to stop shrinking the evidence of my own life to fit into a space my family had decided was the right size for me. I am not the complicated family dynamic. I am the reason the lights are on.